talking about how to facilitate meetings today. And before we start, I want us to go to the slides and add a cloud on the spectrum of how confident do you feel with facilitation, from not confident to super confident. I do this all the time. So how do you feel about facilitation? You can grab a cloud here and move it around. I see Katrina and Afifa are on the slides. Hanan and Tracy, are you able to access the slides?
Hey, yeah, I
Where can I
need
find
to
the slide?
download Google Slides apparently.
Sorry?
Where do I find the slide, Amira?
On the chat.
Okay, I think you probably need to put in the link again. I don't see it.
Okay, I just pasted it again so you can open it. I'm gonna give this
Yeah,
10
give
more
me
seconds.
wait. I'm opening up Google Slides. Um,
Okay.
I see some anonymous animals enter the slide, so
yes,
it's working.
that's me. Gotta be me. Wait, I don't know. Did I make that?
It's the baby.
Okay, great. I see that people are pretty confident around facilitation, so that is great. I want to hear your experiences.
Wait,
And it's always good to like
Amira.
do,
Sorry,
yes.
Amira. I think nonetheless, though, like I've done this probably over so many times, maybe over 100 times and more. But nonetheless, I think you still get, you're still looking for that confidence level all the time. Because for me, I get nervous about it all the time. Am I presenting the right information? You know, how is it going to be received? So I've done it all the time. I'm pretty confident, but I think at times I still get those jitters.
Yeah, that is true. And that is totally normal. And it's always okay to relearn, refresh, and also examine the style of how other people facilitate and see what you can apply from there. I feel like facilitation is something that you never stop learning about, and there's so many ways that you can do it and so many chances to grow. I think it's one of my favorite topics when it comes to organizing. So the objectives of this training is to understand the importance of facilitation, know the basics of how to do it, learn some techniques, and connect facilitation skills with the act of how it relates to empowering individuals, especially those that are on the receiving end of when we facilitate. So before we dive into all the information about facilitation techniques, I want to take a chance to reflect a bit on what is one bad meeting that you went to and what made it bad. For example, one bad meeting that I went to was this organization that I was part of, where I didn't last long in the organizations because the meetings lasted like 3 hours and people just talked and talked and talked, and like that there was no point ever, and you left after 3 hours exhausted, and that's why it was so bad. Like it was so long, and you didn't see the point to it. So yeah, does anyone want to share another example of a bad meeting that you went to?
Okay, well, for me, it was being part of organizations where, and I would say multiple, where it's like you are doing the work that was set out for you, plus the work that was set out for somebody else, because of course they didn't have time or they were had a family emergency or anything like that. Of course, there are situations like that, but when it becomes every single time, and then you have these meetings and they're like, oh, well, Katrina has the time to do it, or Katrina has the capacity to do it, and she'll do it faster than me. And then Katrina ends up doing everything. So that is one of the things. But thank goodness that was long in the past. I would say more than 5 years ago. And I've learned to set boundaries as well as how to, do time management and say no. So that was definitely a learning experience.
Thanks for sharing. That's definitely something I've seen happen in many places. Does anyone want to share one more example of one bad meeting that you went to?
Yeah, sure. I definitely remember one I went to, and even though we had an agenda and they were like set things we were supposed to talk about, it just felt as though the conversations were just like going around and around the place. And it just felt like, we weren't really achieving any kind of thing. And at the end, like how you're saying, like you just felt exhausted and tired and just like confused.
You muted as you were talking, so I don't know if you finished or if you're still talking.
Oh, I'm not sure. Oh, I don't know when it muted back, but yeah, I was just sharing that one meeting I went to, it felt bad because we didn't have like clear objectives for like what it was we were trying to achieve with the meeting. And at the end, you end up feeling a bit like disconnected and frustrated with the topic or whatever it was you were trying to work towards. Yeah, that was it. I'll mute now.
Thanks for sharing. Looks like that is a common thing that happens. And we know what like has made us uncomfortable in past meetings, but as we think about how we want to facilitate, we also want to reflect on what is one great meeting that you went to and what made it great, what left you feeling like, oh, I'm ready to get to work, I love this group, I want to be part of this group. For example, I'm part of a group where our meetings always have a clear agenda that is no longer than an hour, and everyone, like every lead in the team, works on the agenda together to make sure that everyone can talk, but make it clear and concise. So what is one great meeting that you went to, and what made it great?
I like that, Katrina.
I was just unmuting to say the same thing. Katrina said in the chat, every CCN meeting. But yeah, I think similarly the things that I find are like when I step out of a meeting, what makes it feel like it was a great meeting is that there was a set agenda. You discussed things, you like actually worked on something in the meeting, and you came out knowing what are the next steps. And like once you step away from meeting, you can clearly say what happened, what you made progress on, what you need to do next. And I think that's just like a great indication that it was a productive meeting.
for me, well, I'm going to share on what was a bad meeting because I was really thinking about it. Because I've been to so many, but I think someone covered it pretty much, which Afifa said, which would be the opposite. It's I think this just relates to one meeting where, like for example, hosting a facilitation meeting for the Caribbean, and at the end of the day, there isn't really Caribbean representation. The data doesn't really is inclusive of the Caribbean because the Latin America and the Caribbean is really lumped together. And so there isn't that, the meeting is the agenda, the objective is not really achieved. So a great meeting for me is where, and there are a couple that really come into mind, where at the end of the day, the objective is achieved where we see tangible outcomes. So there's a facilitation, it's a working meeting, we achieve that objective, and we can actually have a tangible product or something that we can follow up on to say, okay, the meeting was achieved. And as Katharina said, every CCN meeting, and I think that is very true. Whatever you said you're going to look at, that's what we do. And we can say, yeah, the objective was achieved. And that's a great meeting.
Wonderful, thank you. Thank you for sharing. And I'm glad to know you enjoy CCM meetings. Give me just half a second. I need to open a door. Okay, done. Door is open. So thank you so much for sharing. And let's move on to the more technical information to facilitation. So in general, it is a process that helps us run smooth meetings and be effective and democratic and have good discussions. And it is very important to learn about facilitation because it is inclusive and it retains members, as we reflected on like what feelings a bad meeting gives us versus the feelings that a good meeting gives us makes a huge difference in keeping people's interest. So it's important to work on our facilitation process and develop a facilitation culture for your group, because without facilitation, you run the risk of not being inclusive and losing members, losing important ideas, because some people were more quiet than others, and you lost the thoughts of that person. You risk having ineffective meetings or that last forever, or having conflicts between members. So good facilitation can help us avoid all this risk. And it's important to know that facilitation, it's not just something that we do at a meeting when we stand before a group and start talking. Facilitation starts before the meeting. So something very important, very helpful, is to choose people for roles, and ideally roles that can shift. So on every meeting, people can be engaged in different ways. Like for example, in our CCN meetings where people do the checking, people do the country discussion, people facilitate other things. You can apply that to your own group. For example, I was in a group a few years ago where every meeting we had like a mini training, and for 10 to 15 minutes of the meeting, someone would do like a little training on something small, just to teach other people how to do that thing and get them engaged. People would learn, and those roles would change, keeping members engaged and interested. It's also important to set some ground rules before the meeting. So some examples of ground rules are like arrive on time, or bring this material, or like we don't speak one over the other, or people, like we time people and we do a hand signal, for example, if you're going overtime. There's a bunch of ground rules. For example, I've heard that in some groups, one of the ground rules is that if someone arrives late, that person has to facilitate the next meeting. So you would see everyone arriving on time to try to avoid the pressure of that role. Ground rules are something that you can set together as a group. And it works very effectively, especially for people that meet in person. Always, like, we can always do online ground rules, but especially for in person, I've seen them work very well. And I wanted to ask if anyone here has any example of some ground rules that you have seen in a group before. Yeah,
For
can you,
in-person
yeah,
meetings.
go ahead.
Oh, shucks.
Okay, thank you. A ground rule that I know about is when you want to ask a question, please, you can raise your hand.
Yeah, that is very important, and that also helps people avoid speaking over each other. And some people have different hand signals or other process to ask questions. But yeah, that is a good ground rule. And that is one thing I really recommend for folks to set up as they're building a new group, setting ground rules that are important to the members so that they always also feel that they had a saying, an important part in the development of the culture of the group. And you can also create your own ground rules that accommodate to your group's needs and interests. So that is two things so far. The third thing is setting an agenda before your meeting. That is very helpful. That helps you prepare in advance. And as we mentioned earlier, having a good agenda really helps us use the best of time and helps people feel more motivated, and the meeting was more useful. Oops, sorry. I spoke a bit about rotating roles, and here's more information. There's a lot of text here, so of course you have the slides, you can keep them, you can share them, you can use this if you want to lead this training with your group. But in general, one of the main role is the facilitator, and it's important to know that the facilitator is not in control. The facilitator is not the owner of the conversation, and the facilitator does not like exert authority. They do not abuse this power. The facilitator just helps guide the conversation. The facilitator reminds people of the ground rules. They ask people to participate, to ask questions. They follow the agenda, they help reach consensus. Of course, the facilitator can speak, they can give their own opinion, but it's important for the facilitator to offer this opinion process of discussing or asking questions or giving their own ideas, depending on what you're talking about. Another role is timekeeper. It's always important to set time limits. It helps us keep the group on time. And it's always very important to respect people's time, to start on time, to finish on time. It's important to consider that the people in our team like had things to do before this meeting, they have to do other things after this meeting. So respecting people's times is something that is very, very important to many volunteers. And having a timekeeper helps us set these limits to keep the conversation effective, keep group on time, helps avoid tangents, and helps us have better meetings and have those people that have other things to do before and after the meeting. It helps keep them happy. Another role. So it's always important to have someone assisting with notes. Sometimes, it's very common to see this in many spaces, not just in organizing, that the person leading the meeting is also the person that is taking notes, but realistically, this is hard, and we can't always do a good job of leading a good discussion and gathering everyone's thoughts and ideas when we're also taking notes, and we miss a bunch of things when we're doing both at the same time. So it's important to set a role and ask someone if they can be a note taker, and always rotate this role. And another role that a few groups is have bike watcher. This is especially in England meets and calls breaks, and if necessary, like ask for someone to step apart if they like need to eat, drink water, stretch. It's the person who does energizers if they see that people are falling asleep or something. And this is always something you can apply, especially for longer in-person. So one part of the facilitation process is important to recognize the team culture. And for the facilitation, it's also important to think about what systems we want to have established in our group, whether we already have those systems established with the members, or whether we're building the systems from scratch and we're building a team culture from scratch. These things are important to consider as we facilitate. So we need to think about the decision-making process. So what's gonna be our culture around this? Do we do like majority? We need to do it through consensus that absolutely everyone has to say yes, or do we have other decision-making process about like what do people need to say and how many people need to say it? This changes a lot depending on groups, but it's something to keep in mind as you develop your team culture. Another thing is the way in that you want to track the list of who speaks. So you can keep stack and I'll limit the number of times someone can get on Slack so that you can avoid someone taking over the conversation. And you can also do it by time, like people have X number of minutes in total to talk, and you can choose like if you have 5 minutes total, you can choose a minute now and then 2 minutes later. That again, that varies a lot depending on the group and the team culture. but that is something to evaluate and to decide with your team how you want to keep stack and how you want to track on who talks, who says what they want to say. And another thing that is very, very useful is using hand signals, especially for in-person meetings. That really helps save time. For example, doing hand sparkles, like let me turn on my camera like this. I was part of a group that used this, and it was so efficient because whenever somebody agreed with, instead of taking time to get on stack to say, okay, yes, I agree with you, and then be redundant and repeat the information, we would just sparkle. And if there were a lot of sparkles, we would see that a lot of people resonated with that idea, and we would continue automatically discussing that idea instead of having then 10 people get on stack to say, yes, I agree, yes, I agree, yes, this is good, oh, yes, this is a good idea. And that would save us a lot of time. And there's a bunch of other hand signals. These are just some examples, but there's so many more that you can make up. There's the point of information that you can do like a triangle sign. If someone is like has a key question or is talking about something and you have the clarifying information to assist the conversation and help avoid unnecessary discussion, you can use that triangle signal, and you can use a wrap it up signal with your hands to let people know that they are running out of time. You can do a straw poll. If people agree, thumbs up, thumbs down, or sideways. If they're neutral, they're okay with whatever happens. And there's so many more hand signals that you can use. Another thing when it comes to team culture is whether you want to use a bike rack or not. Some groups also call them parking lot. It's a way of keeping track of ideas that are not on the agenda that can be distracting from the current issue, but they're good things or not necessarily good things, but just like things in general, things that matter to people and that you want to come back to them later. You don't want people to feel like they're not, maybe add them on next meeting's agenda or create a committee that works on that. You can also do go arounds. That is great to get people who don't participate much a chance to share their ideas. There's always some people that talk more than others, so doing a go around is great to give space to people who don't feel like that, like always super energetic to raise their hand and talk. And you can also give space to the people that you need to chat with as well, and they might probably have great ideas, but they're just on the more shy side. And then also you can ask questions directly as the facilitator to people who have not said much or people who have some good thoughts, ideas, and you want to hear more from them. And in general, when it comes to getting people to participate, here are some methods that you can use. You can use open-ended questions, not yes or no questions, but questions like, how do you want to do this? Why, where, when, so that people can open up. You can ask clarifying questions, ask people to be more specific, ask people probing questions to tell you more details, and you can throw questions out to the group. You can use bridging techniques to bring people back to the content of the agenda. and connect the topics even if they're on a tangent to make sure like I got you, I heard you, this is connected to this thing on the agenda, so let's stay on track and maybe let's revisit this if we put it on the bike rack, for example. And that helps you do good transitions as well. And it's also very important to acknowledge great contributions and also just contributions in general. It's very important to acknowledge people, make sure that they know that you heard them and that their thoughts, ideas, whatever they brought into the conversation is of good help to the group and to the meeting. And here is a whole list of tips. So I want to ask a volunteer if you can read the tips on the left side of the page.
Okay, 3, 2, 1. Nobody else. will do
Anyone.
anything. All right, so I'll go. So start and end on time. Don't spend too much time on one thing. Keep announcements to a minimum. Sit in a circle. Have an agenda and set times for each item. Say items of the agenda at the beginning of every meeting so people know what is being talked about and where they can contribute. Encourage participation. Don't all talk at once. Use hand signals and have food. Have food is very important.
Definitely. I'm hungry just thinking about it. um, Another volunteer to read the right side of the page.
Review decisions and next steps at the end of the meeting. Have small actions people can take. Leave with tasks for next meeting. Rotate facilitators. Start with ground rules. Take role or assigning sheet. Introduce new people. Evaluate meetings at the end. At the end, plan agenda as a group for the next meeting and have fun.
Yes, thank you. All these tips are super important. And here's two I want to like highlight. First is introducing new people. I feel like this sounds very obvious, but at the same time, I've been in so many groups where they don't introduce new people, and then those new people never come back because they're like, what's this? Who are they? I don't know anyone. This is weird. I mean, I've also been that new person that was never introduced, and after going, this is weird. I'm leaving. So keep that in mind. It's important to introduce new people and also have fun. I know we're working for climate, it's a serious thing, but without having fun, we're gonna burn ourselves out. So have fun, enjoy the meeting. You're doing great work. You can also have a lot of fun in the process and play games in the meeting, eat fun food, and plan hangouts after the meeting, and just like consider the meeting, the space with volunteers as if it were a circle of friends that you want to create fun activities with. So I just said a lot of information so far. I want to know if there are any questions up to this point.
I think one question I would have is I feel like a lot of the examples are really good for in-person meetings. So, for example, like the bike rack. So I was once in a meeting where they had a similar thing, but it was like a physical space on the wall. So you actually feel as though, yeah, your idea it's there, it's in a space, and we're gonna get to it. How would you suggest replicating that or doing something similar to that in a virtual space?
Hanan, you're a mind reader. Okay, so one way I've seen that in the virtual world is that people have the slides, and at the end they have a blank slide called bike rack, and at the end of that slide, or at the end of the slides, the note taker adds stuff on the slide. And then at the end of the meeting, they review next steps, they review the bike rack, and then they use stuff from the bike rack in the slides to add to the agenda of the next meeting. And some other tips in general for the virtual world. A lot of the same things that we do in person apply, but some other things that we need to consider is practicing the technology. There's tech problems will happen, but be kind to yourself. It's normal. It's not you, it's technology. And we can minimize them by practicing the technology. We can invite people to be fully present. It's very easy to get distracted on the computer. So it's important to keep people engaged and ask them to minimize distractions and do various activities so that people can avoid like clicking on social media or checking their emails or multitasking, and be their full selves in the meeting. It's also very important to be intentional about agenda and facilitation, especially online. It's important to know that we can do the same length of meetings, and online the ideal time is 45 minutes to an hour tops. Not everything that we do in person translates well to online, so we need to limit session length, and if we can't achieve the talk about the full agenda, that is okay. We need to recognize that we are in a very different setting, and it's okay if we don't get to the full agenda. It's better to have a good shorter discussion than to have a long and inefficient discussion. And the same way we do in person, it's good to have people doing different roles during the meeting. And also it's important to recognize that oppression is also dynamic to technology. So people with marginalized identities, people that have visual disabilities or other disabilities might not be able to engage fully online. And there's also people on the phone that might not be able to participate as well as the people on the computer. So yeah, it's important to recognize all of this. And other good practice is to make sure that font is big, it's readable. Don't use flashy stuff to avoid people with visual impairments to have trouble with the presentation. Get people to talk voluntarily, and expect to accomplish less online, and create slides that are nice to look at, not just like a white background with black tiny text. That is not fun. So this is a lot of information, and I know it might not it's not things that from hearing about them the first time you're like, okay, yes, this is what I'm doing. It's something that needs practice, but from what you have heard so far, has your confidence level changed a bit? Like, is there something new that you are ready to practice from these things that you have heard about? What do you think?
Hi, I definitely learned a lot. And you said this, Amira, at the beginning that, you know, you always learning. And what I like is just the, I like the sections in terms of like, you know, the bike rack. I like the planning, you know, allowing the members to plan the next agenda. And while you were talking, I was just looking at how many ways it can be done in the virtual space. And I was actually looking at the reactions and what could be used for the agreement, you know, in the virtual space. And I thought those are very good suggestions, because sometimes you just have a repetition of, okay, I agree, and just additional. And I really like the suggestions so that we can actually go on and make the meeting more exciting and showing the tangible results, or at that point being able to show the percentage who actually agrees and what we can do with, you know, what we need to discuss. So I do like the information shared.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. I'm glad you got some ideas. Anyone else wants to share?
I really like the role of vibe watcher. That made me laugh, but I definitely think that that is important. The decision making process, that was a good point for me to think about. It is something that I've had in the back of my mind of trying to figure out, like, how do you bring that up in a group without, because it's like, to then decide on how we're going to make decisions, we're going to have some kind of consensus, and then I guess like that would be like the first decision that you would need to then implement your process of decision making. So it's definitely things that will be useful. And Afifa, you can give me a review on how our meeting goes on Saturday. But one challenge that I definitely feel with, well, as a coordinator, is because of how small the group is. I'm unsure, like, is it better, like, how can we divide up tasks while ensuring that everybody is participating? And in the same way, you know, just because I'm coordinator doesn't necessarily mean that like I should be the one facilitating, because we're so small. Like, how can you balance not monopolizing the conversation, but because we're so small, also getting your ideas included? But I enjoyed the session. Thank you, Amira.
Yes, definitely. That is one thing to think about, and it depends on the size of the groups and how active the people on the group are. I mean, there can be groups of 3 people where like 2 are talking so much the facilitator doesn't need to say much. But there's also, if even in large groups, there can be groups of 20 people where the facilitator is like, okay, yes, anyone, please. So I think it depends on as people like start to trust each other and be more like invested in the group and what they're doing. So yeah, and also it's, I've been on meetings where the point of the meeting is just to establish the team culture, and we don't talk about anything else other than the ground rules and how we make decisions and how we divide roles and all that. So that is always something that facilitators can think about as they're building a group. We have time for one more question or comment before we have to close, again, to respect time.
Yes, in relation to the question on the slide, how confident do I feel with facilitation? I will say that I was confident before, but with this training, there is so much information. I feel more confident in my position to facilitate. I like the ideas that are presented. I like the ideas that are presented, and I think a lot of them can be incorporated because I do facilitate meetings sometimes. But I think that I'm pretty good, but I think with this training, I will actually be better. So thank you.
No, thank you. And again, what I said at the beginning, I feel like facilitating is something that you never stop learning about. There are so many ways, and there's been so many cases where I feel like, okay, yes, I finally know how to facilitate. I know everything I need to know, and then I go to a meeting or a training and I see someone that has such good facilitation techniques, and I'm like, oh yes, I want to take notes on all the things this person did. So there is never like we never stop learning about this, and I hope this is not the only space we have. And if any of you ever have anything that you want to share about your own style facilitation and want to hold another space to talk about this, we definitely should do that and share facilitation spaces and learn from each other. Here on the slides, there's a bunch of resources that you can use. There's checklists and some ideas for how to build agendas and some games, icebreakers, tools you can use for decision making, scripts. It's great, it's super useful. And there's also a bunch of resources, including templates for slides, for games, and other virtual things you can use. And you just need to like basically copy and paste the slide. So this is great. I really recommend you use this form. And again, thank you. Thank you so much for being here, for taking the time this afternoon. I know many of you are on here taking the time among all the situation to be here. And I hope we can repeat this again soon and just have a space to share all our facilitation styles and reflect on what we learn, what we want to try, what we want to do differently, and the things that we want to explore. So thank you so much for being here, and I hope you have a wonderful night. And see you on the meeting next week.
Thank you.